And I'll say good morning once again. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar to talk a little bit more about Targeted Support and Improvement, or TSI. My name is Ruth Swanson, and I'm the Program Manager with District 180, which is the School Improvement Branch at KDE. And with me today on the presentation will be Marcia Van Hook, who is an Educational Program Consultant who works specifically with TSI schools. Also with us is Jennifer Donnelly, who is a continuous improvement coach who provides support across the Commonwealth. And then also Dr. Juanetta Morrow, who is an educational recovery leader and also one of the contacts for
Ruth, you muted somehow.
I did. Hopefully you heard what I said before that. If you're just joining us, we do ask that you make sure that your microphone is muted. Hopefully mine will not be when I'm speaking. And also, if you want to turn your camera off, that would probably save bandwidth for us. We do have over 300 people already on here, and I know more are joining. So we want to save as much bandwidth as we can. So by the end of our session today, what we hope that you come away with is an understanding of the identification criteria for TSI schools, as well as what that means in terms of requirements for school improvement planning, and then that you really understand kind of the process of improvement planning through the lens of a targeted subgroup. And we'll talk about what that might look like and what's included in that. So we'll start off with the TSI identification criteria for fall of 2022. And it's important to really emphasize that this is the criteria for this fall, and we'll get into why that distinction is important here in just a minute. So this fall, schools were identified for TSI if they had one or more subgroups who were performing as poorly as all students in any of the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools or non-Title I schools by level, so meaning elementary, middle, or high school. And that was based on the 2021-22 school data only. And so that distinction comes in because both this fall and next fall, our criteria doesn't match exactly with what's in statute. So KRS 16346 actually defines TSI as a school that has one or more subgroups performing as poorly as that bottom 5% for 3 consecutive years. Now, since we have started implementing ESSA, we have never had 3 consecutive years of data to use for this identification. And so with COVID and throughout the pandemic, some addendums and some waivers that were provided, the U.S. Department of Ed stated that all states had to identify TSI schools this year. So we had to amend our criteria a little bit so that we could identify schools. So schools were identified this year based on last year's data. Next fall, they'll be identified if they had that low performing subgroup for 2 years, last year and then this year. And then finally, in the 24-25 school year is when we'll get to the actual statutory definition of using 3 years of data to identify TSI schools. So we just wanted to be clear about the distinction and the identification for this current school year. So what are the requirements if you are identified as a TSI school? So one of the things is that you will revise your comprehensive improvement plan, or your CSIP, and it specifically states in there that you want to do these revisions with other stakeholders. So other school personnel, principals, school leaders, teachers, and parents are involved in revising this plan. And obviously you want that plan to be revised in terms of the needs for your low performing subgroup or subgroups. Another requirement that's stated is that your local Board of Education will need to review and approve that school improvement plan that you've created. And then one important aspect as well with TSI schools is that it's really on the district to monitor and provide support for the implementation of that school plan and then the monitoring of that. So KDE monitors mainly for compliance, but it's really the task of the district to provide more of the monitoring for, are the planned activities actually being implemented, and are they being successful? Are they making a difference for our targeted subgroup? So within that CSIP, when you're revising it, you're going to see that there are specific components that need to be addressed for TSI schools. You will find those components in the goal building template that is part of the CSIP. So when you scroll past the goal sections, the indicator sections on that template, you'll see a section that states the TSI components for the CSIP. A couple of those components also, one involves choosing at least one evidence-based practice to implement, and then also choosing any other actions that you've determined through your needs assessment process would, remove barriers for your targeted subgroup. So we should see that evidence-based practice, and we should see any of those additional actions show up as activities in your CSIP. And with any other activities in a CSIP, that means that you'll also include how are you going to measure the success of those activities, how is that going to be monitored for progress, and then if there's any funding that would be needed for those particular activities or actions, what funding is going to be used for those. So those will be seen as you revise your CSIP. So these are the 4 components that are required for a school improvement plan. And it's important to know that your CSIP is your TSI school improvement plan. And you're going to address the following components. And we'll talk more about each one of these in here in just a minute. The first one is around turnaround leadership. And so you're wanting to understand and determine, does leadership, both at the district level and the school level, have the necessary knowledge and skills to support your low performing subgroup? And if not, what do we need to do about that? You're going to look to see if there are any resource inequities that may be creating barriers for some of your students. We'll talk more about that. I mentioned that you're going to choose at least one evidence-based practice or intervention to provide to students. And then you're going to consider, are there other actions that we could do specifically around like the climate and culture through the lens of your targeted subgroup that might assist the achievement of our students? So this is a screenshot of what that section on the CSIP template actually looks like. So you see the 4 components, and with each one, it will give you kind of a guiding question or something to consider. And then it actually gives you space to respond to that. So we are looking for written narrative response for each of these sections. And so Marcia is going to talk a little bit more about our first component, which is the turnaround leadership.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all very much for joining us. There's a lot of you here early in the morning. I do want to talk about the turnaround leadership, as Ruth said, and thank you. We showed the template there, and we're going to kind of break that out a little bit. So statute 160.346 actually defines turnaround for us, and it is a comprehensive transformation of a school to achieve, accelerated, meaningful, and sustainable increases in student achievement through improved school leadership and district support. So note that it talks about both school leadership and the district support, and Ruth had mentioned that earlier. So there is a role for both entities there. So when we take a look at the professional standards for educational leaders, these are the standards that principals are evaluated upon. And so if we look at PSEL Standard 10, we can see that it speaks to educational leaders being agents of continuous improvement. So effective leaders, in essence, they seek to make the school more effective for all stakeholder groups, and you can see them listed there. And they also use methods of continuous improvement to achieve that vision and fulfill the mission, and just making sure that our eyes are on that target. The next part of PSEL 10, so the indicators C and D, It talks about how effective leaders prepare the school and the community. So really, this is about creating that sense of urgency and a mutual commitment and accountability on everyone's part in that role of moving the school forward and engaging others in that ongoing process. So planning is not a check the box one and done. It really is an ongoing process that engages all stakeholders. So we also continue to look at PSEL Standard 10. Effective leaders, they employ situationally appropriate strategies for improvement. So Ruth spoke to that just a little bit in terms of looking at what is your targeted subgroup that brought about the TSI identification. Does the strategy that you're selecting, does that really meet to help close that gap for those kids? And then to assess and develop the capacity of staff. So when you think about that from the district perspective, are we developing our leaders to be turnaround leaders? And from the principal perspective, are we developing the capacity in our staff to really look at emerging trends and really look at what makes a difference for our students in that continuous improvement work? And then the third bullet here for G is develop appropriate systems of data collection and management and analysis and the use. And so it's not just collecting the data, but it's really creating a system of how do we use that data for school improvement. PSEL Standard 10 going on H through J. Not only do we have that system in place, but are we adopting a systems perspective? So are we promoting coherence across the board? Are we making sure that we are not having competing initiatives? And I know that can oftentimes happen. Managing uncertainty, certainly in the time that we live in. Just providing that support and the encouragement, and then opening lines of communication. Can we speak freely with all stakeholder groups? It's the district communicating with the school communicating with the district, and just developing and promoting leadership among your school leaders and from the district side, and developing and promoting leaders from the principal perspective in the building with your staff. So when you get to the template, after you've kind of walked through and thought about those pieces, you're now ready to craft your answer. So how are you going to ensure that school leadership has the skills and disposition to achieve that? So if you think about that from a district piece, what is the district doing to make sure those skills are developed? And from the school side, what is the school leadership team doing to develop those skills and dispositions there within the building to really help student achievement for that underperforming groups? So this would be your narrative section here. Now I'm going to let Ruth take it back. I think you have the next slide, Ruth.
Thank you, Marcia. So the next component that we're going to talk about, we talked about looking at your resources and the allocation of those resources and determining, is there anything creating barriers around resources for our low performing subgroup? So we want to first of all think about, what does resource equity mean in terms of that? So resource equity refers to,
get those posters so I don't forget that.
can we be sure that everybody's muted? Thank you. So resource equity refers to the allocation and use of resources, and we can think of that in terms of people, time, and money, to create student experiences that enable all children to reach empowering, rigorous learning outcomes. So we want to think about things like time. Do the students in your targeted subgroup have the time that they need to reach standards? Are your schedules appropriate so that all students, especially those in your targeted subgroup, have access to both core content as well as maybe any interventions or resource classes that they may need? Are the materials that are used with students in this subgroup up to date, relevant, rigorous? When was the last time that those were kind of reviewed and checked on? Do all students in your targeted subgroup have access to rigorous grade level content? And then do all students have access to quality teaching, both in the core content classrooms where maybe scaffolds and supports are provided, but then also in any kind of pull-out resource intervention instruction that they may have? We want to make sure that they have the best qualified teachers. So along with the PSEL standards that Marcia mentioned, we also use Cognia's performance standards as kind of benchmarks in our school improvement work. And so they have some definitions within their standards that are relevant for us talking about resources. They define equity as access to resources, support, and opportunities based on individual need. And then they define resources as assets and capacity to fulfill the needs of and support for the learning environments for each learner. And they generally consider things like material, digital, and human resources in there. So let's take a look at one of their standards that actually targets resources. Performance standard number 15 states that learners' needs drive the equitable allocation and management of human, material, digital, and fiscal resources. So what that would look like is that we have professional staff members who engage in a systematic process to really analyze learners' needs and current trend data, and then actually make changes in allocations or adjust allocations and how they use resources to meet those needs. So a lot of us are very familiar with using data and analyzing data, but how are we using that data to determine where our resources need to go? So again, here's the section on your CSIP. You will be asked to kind of describe the process that you used to review the allocation and the use of resources. And again, this can be done both at the district level and the school level. So from the district perspective, how are you using data to determine where to allocate certain resources? And then from the school level, once you have your allocation, how are you determining the use of that? Again, thinking back to time and schedules and materials, how is data playing into the decisions that you make around those allocations? So again, we're looking for a narrative describing this. And I think Marcia is going to take over and walk you through the next couple of components.
Thank you, Ruth. So we've just looked at the resources and the inequities from both the district and the school perspective. And now we're going to take a look at the learning environment from both perspectives. So if you look at Cognia's keys to a culture of learning, you will see that stakeholders, and I mentioned that earlier, are actively engaged. This is a crosswalk with the PSEL there. In support of the institution's mission. So those two things align. Learners' academic and non-academic needs and interests are the focal point, and so the stakeholders are also included. So we want to make sure that we're looking at our culture of learning within the building and the district. Go ahead, Ruth. Thank you. So then when we look at Cognia Performance Standard 1, we see what leaders actually do. Leaders they cultivate and sustain a culture that demonstrates that fairness, that respect, that equity, and inclusion for all, and it's free of bias. So we're really looking at our activities and our practices helping us to meet the needs of that targeted subgroup. So leaders model those attributes, they implement practices, and they really do help professional staff members grow in capacity to implement those practices that will really help that targeted subgroup. So after you have processed through those, this is where you would actually look at your narrative. And so the narrative asks you to describe the process used to review the learning culture related to your targeted subgroup. And notice there's a second part here, and additional actions that were determined. So it really is looking for how did you process that learning culture need, and then what actions are going to be taken or have been taken to really determine the root cause of why there's an underperformance for that particular group. And this is where you would write that response. Then we get into the evidence-based practice. So when you're looking at an evidence-based practice that really is supportive of that targeted subgroup, you want to make sure that there really is a preponderance of scholarly literature. So what does that mean? There's a lot of documentation that this has worked, this is practiced, and so you'll begin looking for those. Has it been studied in a study design? Are there statistically have there been results that have proven that it works? And then you can see the rest. It compares the achievement of that strategy to a control group or a practice group. And so I will say when we go to the next slide, we are going to have an upcoming webinar just on evidence-based practice. So you can kind of watch out for that. That will be coming soon. And so these are some questions you're going to want to ask as you start looking for those interventions for that targeted subgroup. What specific needs do the students in this subgroup have? So your analysis before will help you get to that root cause, as I mentioned. What instructional practices are effective in this subgroup? Maybe it's something that is going on in the school and needs to be adapted and needs to be ramped up. Maybe it's a new practice that we need to adopt. What can all teachers do? What can the specialists do? So again, there will be a more in-depth webinar coming just on those pieces. And then this section is actually where you will identify the needs that you revealed through all of that data analysis. And so in the template, you will notice, if you've been in there looking, you will see this section that we've broken out and kind of gone through. There's also a table where you will document your evidence. And so we'll save that for the more in-depth webinar for TSI. I'm sorry, for evidence-based practices. But in this section, you will actually identify that need, and then what are you going to incorporate that specifically targets that group? And then how will you monitor? So I want to mention here, it's not only the monitoring process at the school level, but also how is the district going to help monitor that these things are being implemented and what adjustments need to be made? So if you tie this back to your systems, do we have systems in place to really monitor our implementation? Have we included that in our CDIP or CSIP so that we can see how we're doing along the way? And I think we're going to, actually, I know Jennifer is going to take over now and talk to us a little bit more about those key core work process and how you use those. Jennifer?
Good morning. I'm Jenny Donnelly, in case you weren't on right at the very beginning, and I am a continuous improvement coach. And so I just want to talk to you a little bit about your needs assessment that occurs during phase 2 of our CSIP development and thinking about our key core work processes. So a lot of times we tend to put a lot of focus on the quantitative analysis, looking at our data, our test scores specifically, which is really important. But when we only analyze numbers, sometimes we're just looking at that one outcome from one day, and then we tend to make assumptions perhaps on why we got those results. So this is why it's so important to also ensure that we do a qualitative analysis around our key core work processes. When we do that, it allows us to really think about our systems, the work that we do day to day throughout the entire school year. And then we're able to gather evidence and really get a better understanding as to why perhaps we got some of those particular data points or scores. And then Ruth. So what are the key core work processes? I'm sure we're all aware of these, as they are in eProve and a part of, like I said, phase 2. There are links to documents for these in eProve as well as on our continuous improvement website. As a coach, sometimes when we work with schools, we will suggest that they sort of analyze and look at these key core work processes almost in pairs. So for example, design and deploy standards and design and deliver instruction, you could sort of look at together. When we think about deploying our standards, we're talking about implementing the Kentucky academic standards with efficacy. And when we think about instruction, ensuring we are using evidence-based practices, high-impact strategies. And then you can take a look there. The next 2 key core work processes are around assessment. But before we can analyze data, we need to ensure that we have a balanced assessment system and that assessment literacy, ensuring that we have daily formative assessments that will inform instructional next steps. We want to make sure that we have a protocol in place, a systematic way of looking at data that occurs on a regular basis, so that it helps us to determine not just next steps in the classroom, but next steps within our building. And then those last two key core work processes are around support and culture. So when we think about our support processes, do we have systems in place to sort of evaluate the effectiveness of our current practices, programs, and initiatives? Do we have a solid system in place for intervention? And then, of course, that culture component we know is foundational for learning and ensuring that our culture is conducive for learning for everyone in the building. So another suggestion we make when working with schools is that they use this highlighting process for that qualitative needs assessment around the key core work processes. So again, these documents, you can find them on the Continuous Improvement website as well as an eProof, the strategic level guiding questions for each key core work process. This allows your stakeholders, your leadership team, parents, teachers, to take a closer look at each key core work process and decide, is this something that we are implementing well, monitoring for effectiveness? Perhaps maybe it's just not consistent, or we need to develop those systems further, and that would be highlighted yellow. And then, of course, sometimes, and this is completely okay, sometimes it's just not a priority for us yet. We just haven't gotten to it. And so that would be highlighted red. The couple things to keep in mind here when going through this process is that you want to ensure that it's okay if one of our guiding questions is highlighted in two different colors. And the other thing is the evidence piece. We want to ensure that we, our stakeholders, are thinking about what evidence do we have to show that we are meeting these different components of this key core work process. The reason we go through all of this is so that we can prioritize our work. And it helps us to decide which key core work processes we need to prioritize, which will lend itself to developing our strategies on our CDIP and CSIP. And then thinking about those evidences help us to think about which activities we need to be doing to meet those strategies, goals, and objectives. So I'm going to let Marcia continue and talk about the key elements template.
Thank you, Jenny. And so after you have completed what Jenny just walked through, and that was a great explanation, you're now ready to actually document that evidence. So you can find this page. It is part of your CSIP. You can find this page on the Continuous Improvement Planning webpage that Jenny also mentioned. And you will need to complete this offline. So it is not part of that diagnostic in eProof, so you need to upload this piece. So when you click, this is what you get. You actually get this page that looks, the column has the key core work process on the left, and after you've completed all of that work that Jenny just walked us through, then you actually list your evidence on the right-hand side. And it can simply be, what are you doing there? It can be bullet points, or it can be just one little sentence. This isn't the place for a huge explanation. This really is a place for you to document the evidence of what that practice is going to look like. And then you will upload that into eProof or Continuous Improvement platform. And now I think I'm going to let Ruth finish this out.
Thank you, Marcia. So I want to talk, as we're talking about data and qualitative, quantitative, I want to just share a very brief overview of another report that is available to you that may provide additional insight into the needs of your students. So the Student Performance Monitoring Report, or SPMR, is a report that's available through Infinite Campus. And this particular report provides some summary statistics on 11 different indicators that can be then disaggregated and kind of analyzed around different demographics. You can look at it by grade level, by race, ethnicity. You can look at it by even things like special education and English learner status. So these indicators, the 11 indicators, can be categorized into 3 different categories. So there's indicators around attendance, There's indicators around behavior, and then there's indicators that show some early warning information, like on track to graduation and those types of things. And these 11 indicators around attendance, behavior, and early warning can really be standardized because all schools input the data that's used in this report in Infinite Campus. And so we've actually been able to do some research and have found that these indicators do indeed provide insight into both student achievement and just kind of the overall health of an organization. So using information about attendance, behavior, along with your student achievement data can really just kind of paint a broader picture of the needs and where your students are at. If this is something that you would be interested in, please contact me and we can talk further. We do have a spreadsheet that kind of allows you to copy the data and input it and provides nice charts and some visualizations for you with this particular type of data. So please contact me if that's something that you would be interested in learning more about. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Juanetta Morrow, who is going to talk to you a little bit about one of the additional supports available to you, which is our hub schools.
Is that the same as the persistence to graduation report?
I do not believe that is the same. It may contain some of the similar information, but it is a separate report.
Okay, where do we find that report?
Yeah, if you want to contact me when we get done here, I can kind of walk through that process with you. It is in Infinite Campus, though, under the state level.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I wanted to just speak briefly on the Kentucky Hub Schools, which is a resource that is available to support folks who have fallen into CSI status, as well as anyone else who would be interested in coming for a hub school visit. On the screen, you can see that there are 2 hub schools that are currently supporting the work of the Kentucky Department of Education. One school is Franklin Simpson High School, and the other is Pulaski County High School. Franklin Simpson is over in Western Kentucky, not too far from Bowling Green. So some of you that are located in the western part of the state, that might be a good location for you to visit. Pulaski County High School is located in Somerset, Kentucky, which is in the southeast region of the state. And you can see on the screen some of the different topics and supports that are available at each location. Some of them are similar. Some of them are very It really just depends what kind of support you're. I'm sorry, someone keeps muting. Someone keeps muting me. Under Franklin Simpson High School, you can see that they really offer some supports around effective teams. Culture is a big piece for Franklin Simpson High School. And so if that's something that you're working on in your school, you might be interested in visiting to get some information about really supporting the growth of culture in your school or your district. And they also are showcasing some grading practices and some student first scheduling. At Pulaski County High School, professional learning communities is definitely one of the strengths. That's one of the things that people come to talk about and see and get information on. But there are a lot of other things offered as well. A big piece of work that Pulaski County High School is showcasing is their work around co-teaching. They have a model that involves 2 regular education teachers and a special education teacher in their classrooms. And that is a model that a lot of people have already been interested in and have contacted us to come and see. We do offer in-person visits for small groups, and we also offer some virtual visits for those that are in different parts of the states and there is a long travel. So my information, as well as Dr. Tom Stewart's information, is on the screen for you. And so if you have any interest in visiting either of the hub schools, either in person or virtually, we would love to hear from you.
Thank you, Juanetta. So we have provided a lot of information today that I know will take a while to kind of digest and reflect upon. I wanted to leave you with a few other resources that are available to you. The TSI webpage contains other documents, guidance, and resources. Also, it includes more information about the hub schools. And on our page there, you can also click a link that would give you a list of some of the services that are available through the continuous improvement coaches. We also provide lots of different professional learning opportunities throughout the year through the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support and the Educational Recovery staff. So you can see the list of some of the options on there. They range from systems trainings to leadership training. I know the National Institute for School Leadership has a new cohort that starts every year, if that's of interest. Things like cognitive coaching, and then of course our annual continuous improvement summit is provided as well. Here is contact information for the Frankfurt-based folks that can help you out. You've heard from Marsha and myself today, and also Natalie Guashiri is a part of our team, and she leads the evidence-based practices initiatives at the department. So she's a good contact for you, as well as just general improvement planning. So I know we have a lot of folks on with us today, but if you do have a question that you think might be relevant for everyone, you can feel free to unmute and ask that at this point in time. Otherwise, please feel free to contact anybody that you've heard talk today or anybody listed on the screen right now as you go through your process and have additional questions. Okay, not hearing any, oh, do we have a question?
This is Amanda Reed with LaRue County, and I think I have an observation and a question.
Okay.
I looked at some of the statewide data, and it appears as though middle school disability is a very, very, very high rate of TSI, like almost 50% of the schools across the state being identified. So if there are any hub schools or any resources that might be, I mean, clearly it's a statewide issue. We're all in the same boat together working to make that better.
Right.
If there's anything specific to that area, I know I would appreciate it, and I would say there are others that would appreciate that too.
Yeah, definitely. And I know Juanetta mentioned the co-teaching at Pulaski, so that might be something of interest.
Yes, and Ruth, I know that Pulaski County is, our hub school is a high school, but we typically have visitors from all across the grade bands. So we're happy to work with high school, of course, but also middle schools or elementaries. Of course, the things that you see on a hub school visit, you're going to have to apply to your context. You won't be able to replicate it exactly, but a lot of the resources would be useful to folks at any grade level.
Great. And we also know that co-ops have trainings and support for students with disabilities. So that might be another avenue that you want to explore. Any other questions before we say goodbye?
Yes, I had one. If I could get you for a second.
Sure.
Do you know of schools like kind of where you were mentioning the hub schools? Are there any throughout the state that you know that are doing a lot of work and seeing success with EL students, moving them out of the TSI category?
Yeah, we can definitely look into that and get you some information. We have worked with some schools that were identified as additional targeted support and improvement and have made improvements and moved out of that status. So they may be somebody that we can connect you with. So I will send out some information about some possible schools.
Thank you.
This is Stacy Lynn with Powell County Schools. The report that you were talking about, reaching out to you about that, I would assume most of us would want that information. I don't know if that would be easily just to share with us as a whole.
Yeah, I can do that. We do have a PowerPoint that kind of walks through that process, but and I can share that out. And then from there, if you have additional questions, you can contact one of us.
That's great. Thank you.
You bet.
Ruth, I have a question, please.
Yes, ma'am.
This is Sharon Privet at McCray Central. Now that phase 2 was due on November 1st, do we go back and revise that now with the updated template?
Yes. Anytime we talk about school improvement, we always want to assure you that those should be living documents. So as you get new information, as you go through this process, you can definitely go back through and revise. Specifically, I know on the executive summary, there was a section for TSI schools that you may not have been ready, either at the district level or the school level to address yet. And then I know that there is an assurance that asks for you to speak to the planning for TSI, and you may not have been ready to do that. So you will want to go back and revise that as well.
Okay, thank you
Good
so
question.
much.
Yep.
Thank you.
Hey, Julia.
This is Amanda Farmer from Marion County. Is there a deadline to have the board approve these revised plans?
Well, your plan is always due by January 1st. And so you want to make sure that it gets reviewed and approved by then. And again, if you turn it in and you need to make revisions beyond that, you can always go back and revise.
Okay, another question I have. If we got a TSI label for a subgroup like EL, but this year we do not have 30 students to reach our end count for that particular group, what will happen with that label?
I would refer you to somebody in the Office of Assessment and Accountability in terms of the data. We always like to say that we take care of support once the identification has happened. It's actually the Office of Assessment and Accountability who makes that data determination. Julia, I can see you're trying to talk, but I don't hear you.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Suzanne Farmer.
Yes, I can.
Okay, I am in a feeder system. So my school is a primary school. It's preschool through first grade. And we were assigned TSI based on the school that we feed into. And what I'm struggling with, part of what I'm struggling with is that obviously like some of the kids that are in this, that were tested were never even in our school because it was before our school existed. Mm-hmm. And some of the assignments or the categories that we've been given when we look at our data as a school, which is not, of course, the Kentucky State Assessment because our students don't take that. For example, our African-American students are performing above the level of our scores, and we actually were assigned TSI and African-American. So I don't know sometimes like how to address that on our CSIP when we're not, our data here and the data we'll be using to measure our progress don't align with the data of our school that we feed into.
Yeah, one thing that I would think about is kind of the transition. So what happens once kids leave your school, and how are we working with the schools that, the students move into, transition into? And I think that would be part of the discussion, is with those feeder schools and in that transition process.
Hi, this is Hope Darty from New Haven. Just real quick on the eProve, those forms, are those all on there automatically, the TSI, the extra parts?
Yes, it is. It is on the goal building template. Once you scroll past all of the indicator and goal areas, you'll see that section on that template.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
This is Jacob Mead from Boyd County High School. I was just wondering the difference between TSI and ATSI. And
Good
how does the
question.
school go from a TSI to a TSI?
Yeah, so ATSI, we identify every 3 years. And so the next time we will identify that, I believe, is 2025. And the definition for ATSI is any school that was TSI the previous year and still has that low performing subgroup or subgroups. So basically, if you don't exit TSI and it is an ATSI identification year, you would be identified for ATSI. All right, we've had some great questions. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have additional questions once we leave here today. We will post this on the TSI webpage as well, so that you can go back and refer to anything you want to see again or hear again, and also share with colleagues who may not have been able to join us today. So thank you so much for your attendance, and let us know if you have other questions.